Keep going
the
on
third
keep
one,
going.
because I don't want to belabor this, is priests. And I use the word priest partially because it rings kind of uncomfortably for most of my evangelical friends. And I don't care really that we call our pastors priests, but I do care that they be priests. And I think you've gotten at this a bit yourself, meaning that there's some continuity between what we're actually priests in, let's say, Leviticus, like an Old Testament priest, and what priests do now, which is, again, not generally keep the congregation from doing wrong, or doing right instead of doing wrong, or something like that, or not just leading the people in worship in the way that we think of leading in worship now, but actually setting apart a space and a people by being the ones who most represent and guard what is sacred, what is holy. And because they guard it, then everyone can become a priest. I like the saying of the priesthood of all believers, and I think it's true. I think it's a deeply, Protestant, but deeply true intuition that we were made to be priests. And Adam and Eve, in the garden, they were meant to be priests. That's what they were meant to do. But if we skip straight to the priesthood of all believers, then it's almost like the priesthood of none, right? It'd be like skipping the roles of a family. If the family doesn't have a father and a mother, then the children can never grow up to be fathers and mothers. If they weren't fathered and mothered first, then they can't become those authoritative roles in anyone else's life. And so similarly, I think the church has to have priests who have authority and who especially are there to guard the space, the times of worship, and to guard the community as set apart, which you obviously do in plenty of ways, through the liturgy, through the Eucharist, and through the sermon. And that's an element that I think we've lost. You mentioned in a video that you sent me, just a brief one with you talking to Paul Vanderklay, about small groups, how small groups have become kind of a ministry, a megachurch way of doing small church still. But we all sort of sit around wondering, why has it not worked that well? Or at least most of us do. Like there are, of course, powerful things that happen in small groups, but it's been quite a number of years, decades even, trying to make that kind of the central means by which we do discipleship. And I'm not against small groups, but I am also asking the question, like, why doesn't it work as well as it should? And I think part of the reason for that is because it's too flattened, because there isn't usually hierarchy. They're usually more like peer groups. And the hierarchy both brings authority, but also it brings an authority who sets apart. That is, who sets the time apart. So we've started practicing this in our local community, especially with younger people that I teach. I'll say, like, you should even set apart certain group chats on your phone. Well, where if you have a certain group chat with friends, you should set apart one where you say, by the way, guys, this is holy space. This is not the place for your memes or whatever. This is a place where we only have one kind of conversation. We keep the conversation on that level. Whenever, even if we leave and don't, use it for 2 weeks, when we come back to it, it is still a holy space. And you can do this with your own living room, of course. And it's what we do with the Eucharist. We set apart the elements. We make them not like some kind of magic, but through our participation in Christ and through the liturgy, we set those elements apart from what would just be your typical bread or wine or whatever you eat and drink. And so we can do this in other elements of our life. And if we did, I think it would make even what we experience in our living rooms, what we call small groups, more powerful. And so that's a lot of what I mean when I say priest. Our spiritual leaders should be those who help us who should be set apart, and they should also help us to be set apart. So it starts with them, right? If your pastor from the pulpit is always just saying, I'm just like you guys, he's wearing a t-shirt, just like you're wearing a t-shirt, and everyone's just kind of like, we're all just sinners here together, and I'm just kind of like riffing with you. I understand that, and I understand the kind of winsome appeal to that kind of sermon, but then you don't have a priest. You might have the guy who is on staff, who's in charge of the church, but you don't have a priest. And so you need, to some degree, to have someone who not only helps you to be set apart, but who you could look at and say, that is actually my spiritual father. They are actually further along than I am. Though the butcher, the baker, and everyone else can be a priest in their own right, someone needs to be an actual priest who shows the rest of us what the priesthood looks like.
So much there, and it's funny because it's like, we have to be able to, I think, from what it sounds like, because you want to stay in this space, and it's the freedom. Well, it's the freedom to be able to say these things and stay in that space. I think that is actually the interesting thing.